Okay, so in this video I'm just going to be doing a Brexit update, largely talking about Theresa May's Davos speech, but I'll also talk about how that relates a little bit more broadly to what's happening in the city and with trade, and also how the EU and European leaders have responded to both her Brexit speech, which she made earlier this week, and her Davos speech, which she made today, Thursday the 19th of January. So that's 4 different sections, and those are the 4 sections that I will divide the video into. So first of all, the speech that she made on Thursday the 19th of January. So that speech was at the Global Economic Forum in Davos. And this is really a place where political and business leaders come together. So there's something almost, I guess, a little bit ironic in the fact that she was making this speech to the global elite that she has been so scathing about really since she came into office in July. And I believe that the air within the room where she spoke was a little bit subdued. You know, she didn't have a Q&A session after the speech, and she read from notes instead of speaking off the cuff, as it were. So basically the speech really had nothing new to say, or certainly didn't say anything new in addition to what we heard in her Brexit speech at the beginning of the week. And I think maybe interestingly it also didn't include any reference to the lower tax rate, which she mentioned earlier in the week, nor did it really discuss the customs union at all. So it was a little bit shorter than the earlier speech as well. And really her main message in the speech was that Britain wants to take a leadership role in the global economy in a post-Brexit world. And also I think that the aspect of the speech that maybe has been grabbing the most global headlines is that she, while saying that they wanted to be a global economy, was also quite explicit in her argument that globalization isn't working, or that certainly for a lot of people they believe that globalization is what's fueling a sense of inequality. So from her point of view, she argued that globalization at the moment is adding to the sort of politics of division that we're seeing across the world, both in the United Kingdom and also in the US. So she was really calling on these political and business leaders to realise that everyone needed to work together for a better communal future, but also I think for a shared sense of fairness in the world. So she was very much focusing on, I suppose, the people she deems the just about managings, and how the global economy maybe isn't working for them at the moment. So although it was presented in a very diplomatic manner, I think the speech actually was a little bit more cutting than people realised perhaps when she was actually delivering it. Okay, so what's been happening in the city, and really some of the biggest headlines coming out today don't really relate so much to what happened in Davos, but more just what's been going on in general this week following the announcement that Britain would certainly be leaving the single market. And that's, I suppose, affected the city, and particularly all of the different firms and corporations that reside in the city, because it means they'll probably lose their passporting rights, which is basically their ability to trade easily within countries kind of on a global level. And while some of these passporting rights could be replaced by what's called equivalence, where you just use the equivalent regulations of whatever country you're operating in, it's still going to be quite headachy for a lot of these firms. So HSBC have announced that they'll be moving 1,000 jobs from London to Paris. And obviously, you know, this is something that I suppose is worrisome for a lot of people. UBS, the Swiss bank, have announced that they'll be moving a fifth of their workforce, something like 1,000 people also, from London. And similarly, JP Morgan have said that they'll be moving a quarter of their workforce, which equates to something like 4,000 people. So this is really quite a lot of employees to be relocating from London London. And while a lot of people believed that Theresa May's speech earlier in the week had been reassuring for business, it seems that these plans that are being put in place now might suggest otherwise. And while some people are saying these are just contingency plans, this is if, you know, worst comes to worst and worst case scenario happens, a lot of other people are saying that no, this is in fact a reality, that there's a huge bulk of business now that won't be able to be done in relation to, I suppose, trading the euro, etc., from London, and as a result they will have to move. So that is, it seems like, just they're not trying to scaremonger, this is just the reality of the situation. So following the sort of situation there in the city, the Financial Times had a good article during the week about the sort of realities of the trade deals, particularly following Theresa May's Brexit speech. And first of all, they were saying, like, the bottom line here is that this is a negotiation that the EU are going into that they've never done before, and they're being asked to do it on a timescale that they've never achieved before. So the whole plan in itself is very ambitious, and it's unlikely that the 2-year deadline that's been set is going to be manageable by the EU. Similarly, the newspaper said that regardless of Theresa May's plans for this sort of post-Brexit global Britain, the EU, no matter what the deal is, will remain Britain's biggest export market just because of its proximity to Britain. So the EU and Europe is just geographically the closest neighbour to Britain. So even if they do all these trade deals with India, New Zealand, Canada, United States, the bottom line is it's likely that the EU will remain the biggest export market anyway. And then I suppose, kind of following on from that, the trade deals that you might be able to do with the United States, I've heard a lot of people saying, and not just in this FT article, but I was at a discussion last night about Trump and how he's going to impact Britain, that really he is protectionist, he's America first. So really Britain shouldn't be placing too much hope in what he's saying about doing a deal with them. I think it's important to remember as well that when Michael Gove asked him, are we no longer at the back of the queue, he just said, I think you're doing a great job. He didn't say, no, you're at the top of the queue. He made no such kind of promises. So people have kind of jumped the gun and made assumptions there that might come back to haunt them in the future. Okay, so finally then, how have things been going in the EU, and how has the EU responded to Theresa May's various speeches this week? Well, I think there's been a certain level of scepticism. I think many people, particularly, this seems to be the notion coming out of Davos this week, is that people feel that Britain is turning inwards. And I think one of the key terms or tags that have been used to describe the whole Brexit negotiation by many Europeans is as a divorce. And because it's a divorce, there will have to be some kind of divorce settlement, and that's coming back to this fine that the EU are saying that they're going to impose on Britain for leaving. Similarly, kind of widely reported in the media this week has been Boris Johnson, who made another kind of faux pas or boo-boo during the week about François Hollande. So he compared François Hollande to a World War II prison guard who wouldn't let the UK leave the prison. So he's been hugely reined in for that and criticised, and I think a lot of people feel sorry for all the diplomats in Europe that are trying to do their best, and Johnson just keeps coming out with these absolutely idiotic statements. Wolfgang Schäuble, who's I think he's the German foreign minister, he said that they won't be placing any punitive deal on the EU, on the UK, the EU won't be, but the bottom line is they're not happy that they're leaving, and they think that they would be better off if they stayed inside. So that's just their bottom line. And again across Europe we've heard people saying that Britain cannot cherry pick what they want. So I think the main message coming out of the EU is that any deal that Britain gets outside of Europe has to be a worse off deal than they would get should they be part of the EU. So it has, their situation outside the EU has to be worse off than their current situation within it. So, you know, all remains to be seen. Theresa May will be giving a speech next week on her industrial strategy, so I'm sure that there'll be lots more to discuss in relation to that. So thank you very much for listening to this quick video. Don't forget to like me on Facebook and check out my website where I put up a weekly news digest, and you can follow me on Instagram. But thanks for listening, and I hope I see you soon.